TCS Concordia, CV-65 Confederation-class dreadnought, flagship of Admiral Tolwyn, veteran of the battles of Earth, Sirius, Vukar-Tog, and a key element in the Terran Confederation's campaign to liberate the Enigma sector. It's little wonder why TCN personnel considered a posting to this storied ship a prestigious honor. Her story begins sometime in the mid-2660s, the exact year of the Concordia's commission being unknown. But what is known was that she was the flagship for the Enigma sector Confederation fleet in their operations against the Kilrathi Empire. But there were at least two engagements of note during this campaign. The first being the defense of Gora-Kar, a world that had rebelled and had successfully thrown off the rule of the Kilrathi Empire. Confed, eager to deny their longtime enemies a populated world, established Olympus Station to aid in their defense. But the Kilrathi had finally grown tired of Gora-Kar's independence and had launched an attack by 2665. The Kilrathi plan of attack was simple: attack the Concordia, which was stationed in system at the time, as they were attacking Olympus itself. Unfortunately for the Kilrathi, the pilots assigned to the operation were Christopher Maverick Blair and Rauga Hobbs Narhalis, both among the most skilled pilots of their time. They, along with two broadsword pilots, managed to stop cold the Kilrathi attack on their carrier and the attack on Olympus Station, all in the same mission. The second noteworthy battle was none other than the final assault and destruction of Kitithrak Mang, the Imperial military headquarters for Kilrathi operations in 2667. The original plan was to assemble the majority of their planes into a strike force that would proceed directly to the Kilrathi starbase and send it on a one-way ticket to see Sivar, the Kilrathi god of war. However, Admiral Tolwyn, realizing that it was a foolhardy idea to commit all of his pilots to the assault, kept a small patrol force behind to deter any Kilrathi sneak attacks on the Concordia that might slip by, of which he assigned Maverick to. Blair had other ideas, and took a saber out to attack the station himself, where he successfully dueled with Crown Prince Thrakathnar Karanka before striking the killing blow to the Kitithrak Mang starbase. Not long after, however, Admiral Tolwyn aboard the Concordia began receiving reports that the crew of a Confed cruiser, the TCS Gettysburg, performed an almost unspeakable act: mutiny. Assigned to the investigation, Tolwyn and the Concordia jumped to the Gettysburg area of operations, where they found the crew had split into two groups, one having taken over a Confed fuel depot to become pirates, raiding Confed transports and free traders in the area, whereas the second group refused to join their activities and chose to stay on board the Gettysburg. Tolwyn eventually managed to make contact with the Gettysburg herself, who in turn sent a representative to explain the situation, Lieutenant Jason Bear Bondarevsky. He explained that the mutiny occurred only because of an illegal order to fire on Kilrathi civilians, which according to Confederation law, was a legally valid reason for refusing an order from their superior officer. Now fully understanding the situation and taking the man at his word, Tolwyn sent Blair to the Gettysburg to offer a full pardon to the crew, and working together, they were able to put an end to the treacherous ex-Confed pirates in the system. With the Gettysburg matter resolved, the Concordia returned to regular duty, where she was assigned to hold the Deneb sector to buy time for the 6th Battle Fleet to regroup, and to assist in the shakedown tests of the prototype Morningstar fighter. But in an unexpected turn of events, she was also able to provide support to James Taggart's covert operation to locate and destroy the secret headquarters for a group of Terran spies called the Society of Mandarins, eventually resulting in their utter destruction. After these special operations, Tolwyn and the Concordia would fight in the Second Battle of Vukar-Tog, as part of Admiral Wayne Bainbridge's Operation Backlash, a high-risk gamble to savage the Kilrathi fleet to keep Confed in the war. This Second Battle of Vukar-Tog required the Concordia working in cooperation with the Confederation fleet to attack the Kilrathi ships jumping into the system to retake the planet of Vukar-Tog, with the goal being to bring the Kilrathi to the point where they either be completely annihilated or forced into a retreat with heavy losses. During this undertaking, the Concordia doubtless shone brightly through her deeds, but that was not to be the only role she would play in the operation. The second half of Bainbridge's plan required the use of a small task force of ships, led by the TCS Tarawa to attack Kilra and draw off a significant portion of the Kilrathi fleet heading to Vukar. Unfortunately, while the assault on their homeworld succeeded, the other ships except the Tarawa were destroyed as they exfiltrated back to Terran space, with the escort carrier herself eventually in dire straits as she was trapped and unable to escape back to the Confed fleet. But as the final orders were given by the Tarawa commander, the Concordia jumped into the system and rescued the Tarawa at the 11th hour, forcing the Kilrathi into a retreat and saving the first Terran ship to attack Kilra directly. Of course, in doing so, Tolwyn defied a direct order by Bainbridge to not risk his ship, a fact that became curiously omitted when the success of the operation became public knowledge to the Terran media. In the next 18 months of the war, the Concordia would continue her campaign against the Kilrathi Empire, but this time with the Confed Navy and Space Forces finally on the offensive against their seemingly eternal nemesis. For the first time, it seemed that humanity might actually win the war against the Kilrathi. But then the false armistice happened. During said event, the Concordia, still under Tolwyn's command, destroyed a Kilrathi carrier while a ceasefire had just been enacted between the Terran Confederation and the Kilrathi Empire, with Tolwyn in full knowledge of this before committing to the assault. When he was confronted by a Kilrathi dignitary about his actions in full view of the Terran media, the diplomatic consequences forced Tolwyn to resign his commission so as not jeopardize the burgeoning peace talks. But this was just a well-planned ruse by Bainbridge and Tolwyn to give both Confed and the former admiral the plausible deniability needed to investigate what it was the Kilrathi were actually up to with their sudden declarations of peace, which was generally considered to be a concept that was completely alien to the Kilrathi culture. Eventually, to the shock of the Terran Confederation, somehow, the Kilrathi, a species that prided itself on its strict adherence to their warrior culture and general preference for death over surrender, were only using the new peace to build a fleet of super carriers to renew the war on their hated enemies. In the chaos of this revelation, Tolwyn was reinstated to his position as admiral and given command of the Concordia along with the Confed Third Fleet. He was then tasked with the seemingly insurmountable goal of prevailing against this new Kilrathi invasion. The next series of battles were devastating for the Confederation, with the Concordia having fought in each one, starting with the Battle of Warsaw, where the Confed Navy met the Hakaga supercarriers for the first time, followed by the Battle of Sirius, where what was supposed to be a last stand ended in a terrible rout for the Confederation forces, who were forced to retreat to Earth to prepare for what could very well have been the final battle of the war. The Battle of Earth itself was a desperate attempt to keep the Kilrathi from winning the war outright, involving suicidal tactics by civilian ships and marine boarding actions to hurt the Hakaga fleet. Despite this, only last-minute reinforcements from the Republic of Landreich was able to force the Kilrathi ships into retreating. Unfortunately, the Concordia was horrifically damaged during the battle, only able to make 20% of her top speed. She would, in time, be repaired to something approximating operational status. However, the burdens placed upon her had finally begun to take their toll. She was no longer in a state to be able to fight on the front lines, and was relegated to rearguard patrols in Confederation space during the last year of the war. Unfortunately, this is where the Concordia story would end. While the details of her final mission are somewhat unclear, the Concordia was patrolling near the planet Vespis when she was ambushed by Kilrathi raiders, the results of which ended in the Confederation dreadnought crashing on the planet below off the Mistral coast. When she was found by a survey team that included Colonel Christopher Blair and General James Taggart, the Concordia was evaluated to be a total loss. The Concordia was a Confederation-class dreadnought, so she was among the biggest of the known carriers in the Confederation Navy at 983.7 meters and 73,000 tons. For reference, the Yorktown class came in at 720 meters and the Bengal class at 700. Again, due to her classification as a dreadnought, she boasted perhaps the heaviest weapons seen on a Kilrathi War-era spacecraft, along with a respectable amount of armor for a ship of her size. The Concordia's armor at the front and rear were rated to be at 500 centimeters thickness and 400 centimeters on port and starboard sides. She was also outfitted with phase shields much like every other Confed capital ship, rendering it impervious to small arms fire from strike craft. However, shields of this type would be vulnerable to antimatter torpedo strikes and antimatter guns. On the topic of weaponry, the Concordia boasted an array of laser turrets as every other frontline carrier would, along with flak cannons, antimatter guns, and, yes, the phase transit cannon. The PTC was derived from Kilrathi technology witnessed during the slaughter of the Goddard colony in 2654, where they used an experimental weapon called a proton accelerator gun mounted aboard a Sivar-class dreadnought. When Confed forces eventually managed to destroy the vessel, their scientists and engineers began poring over its wreckage, and based upon their findings they created the phase transit cannon, a more refined, lower power version of the proton accelerator gun that was designed specifically for ship-to-ship combat. In this regard, the PTC was very effective, able to one-shot most capital ships. However, the amount of power needed to fire was immense, and if fired at insufficient power levels, the ship's power plant could risk exploding. It can be presumed that even with power levels at optimal, repeated firings would have been ill-advised due to the risk to the dreadnought. Moving from weapons to mobility, the Concordia's speed was typical for ships of her class, with a maximum velocity of 100 km per second and a standard cruising velocity of 50 km per second. Her acceleration was simply rated as bad, and her maximum yaw, pitch, and roll were all an astonishing 1 degree per second. The Concordia was not just a dreadnought in the classical sense, but also a high-capacity strike craft carrier, with her fighter complement listed as 120, with these craft being the Ferret, the Epi, the Rapier, the Saber, the Broadsword, and for a brief time, the Morningstar and Crossbow. It is important to note that during her service, the hangar bays would often be attacked directly, oftentimes by Kilrathi pilots performing suicide charges, the damage of which would prevent the launch and retrieval of fighter craft until the damage was repaired. On more than one occasion when the Concordia came under attack, she was forced to rely on nearby Confed ships and strike craft to help even the odds. This flaw in the design was to be addressed in future carrier classes with redundant hangar bays, as would be seen on the Lexington-class heavy carriers, although with the end of the Kilrathi War in 2669, addressing the need for multiple hangars was presumably given a low priority. As has been reiterated many times before, ships and technology may provide the means to fight wars, but it is the men and women who win them. And the Concordia, being the pride of the Confederation fleet, was home to a wide variety of pilots and officers with storied careers both aboard the venerable ship and beyond. Jeffrey Tolwyn. No conversation about the Concordia would be complete without Admiral Jeffrey Tolwyn, as the two are inextricably linked. The Concordia was where Tolwyn planted his flag as Admiral, and from her lead the Enigma Sector campaign to victory. He would stay with the Concordia until he was transferred to the Behemoth Project shortly after the Battle for Earth. After the Concordia's destruction, Tolwyn would then move certain elite pilots to the TCS Victory in order to safeguard the Behemoth on a mission to Kilra, which ultimately failed. After the war, Tolwyn had a brief stint in the Landreich Navy, helping them get a Kilrathi heavy carrier online to defend the Landreich frontier worlds from pirates and renegade Kilrathi warlords. He would return to the Terran Confederation as an admiral in the Strategic Readiness Agency, where he would use an off-the-books group, the Black Lance, to instigate a war between the Terran Confederation and Union of Border Worlds, in a misguided attempt to prepare humanity for its next war with a belligerent alien species. He was stopped in time by Christopher Blair, tried, and found guilty. Shortly thereafter, he was found hanging from the rafters of his cell. Rauga Hobbs Narhalis. A former cruiser captain of the Kilrathi Empire, Hobbs originally defected to the Terran Confederation as he had grown disenchanted with the meaning of the war and the Imperial leadership. What no one could have expected was that he was actually a deep-cover spy who had undergone a memory overlay procedure, and had been placed by Prince Thrakath himself. He could only be activated at a certain point when a specific code phrase was used, which was what happened near the end of the war in 2669. But before that point, Hobbs was who he said he believed he was, an honorable warrior driven by his principles rather than loyalty to a flag. His service aboard the Concordia was exemplary, aiding in the defense of Gorakar on both occasions. Although many of the other Confed service people aboard were highly wary of the kill, he never let it prejudice him against fighting alongside them. Christopher Maverick Blair, the hero of Venice, the coward of K'tithrak Mang, the heart of the tiger. All titles used to describe Maverick at one point in his life or another. His career as a Space Forces officer began aboard the Tiger's Claw during the liberation of the Vega sector in the 2650s, where through his skill in the cockpit he would climb up the ranks to become a colonel. Unfortunately, an ambush by Kilrathi stealth fighters against the Tiger's Claw resulted in Blair being blamed for the attack and demoted to captain. He would then spend the next 10 years flying in-system security for Carnarvon Station, until a chance meeting with the TCS Concordia and Admiral Tolwyn brought him back into the front lines of the war, and provided him the opportunity to clear his name. Afterwards, Maverick was reinstated to full colonel, and eventually found himself aboard the TCS Victory as wing commander during the Behemoth disaster. He was then selected to be the pilot to fly the Temblor bomb to Kilraw that ended the Kilrathi War in 2669. Maverick would retire, briefly, to become a farmer, but a series of events brought him back to active duty where he would help expose the Black Lands conspiracy. Later, he would join the Confederation Navy as a Commodore to aid in the design of the Midway-class mega-carriers. Jeanette Angel Devereaux. Jeanette served aboard the Tiger's Claw along with Christopher Blair, where they first developed their friendship. 10 years later, after the venerable carrier's destruction, they would be reunited by circumstance aboard the Concordia, when Blair was brought aboard after defending her from Kilrathi marauders. This time, however, Angel was a colonel and wing commander of the Dreadnought's air group. It was perhaps their friendship and blossoming romantic feelings for each other that allowed Blair to stay aboard long enough to clear his name and prove his abilities as a frontline pilot. They would serve together up until the Battle of Earth, where Blair was injured and forced off the line, while Angel was transferred to General Taggart's Covert Operations Division as part of a secret, long-shot mission to Kilraw. She would be captured by the Kilrathi and publicly executed by Prince Thrakath, but not before she helped establish a series of spy satellites around Kilraw itself, which exposed the tectonic weaknesses of the planet. This information would then be capitalized upon with Maverick's infamous Temblor bomb run to Kilraw, which ended the Kilrathi War. In a historical sense, one could say Angel had the last laugh on the Kilrathi. Etienne Doomsday Montclair, a Maori ace pilot with a consistently pessimistic view on everything, although those who dig deeper underneath will find a most loyal and dependable friend, as was the case with his storied friendship with Jason Bear Bondarevsky, who together would join in the end run as a pilot aboard the Tarawa, fight alongside the Landreich fleet during the 11th hour of the Battle for Earth, and even join the Landreich Space Forces after the war during their operations to salvage the KIS Karga. Janet Sparks McCullough, a hangar technician who started aboard the TCS Austin, then moved to the Tiger's Claw, and then eventually to the Concordia as a chief petty officer. She would be one of the few people aboard the Concordia to befriend Christopher Blair, as he was still seen as a coward and a traitor at the time. When the final assault on K'tithrak Mang took place, she helped him defy orders by outfitting his saber with torpedoes to assault the Kilrathi starbase. It was sometime after the liberation of the Enigma sector did she meet Jason Bondarevsky, who had been transferred aboard after the Gettysburg Mutiny. Together, they would form a lasting bond that would see them through the end run aboard the Tarawa and the false armistice incident, where she was made an officer and promoted to lieutenant. She was also with him aboard the TCS Coventry, where Jason would become her captain, and Janet the ship's damage control officer. When the war ended, they retired together so that she could look after his physical recovery after the loss of the Coventry. The two would also move to the Landreich Navy and take part in Project Goliath, the name for Landreich's attempt to salvage a Kilrathi heavy carrier. Jason Bear Bondarevsky. Bear's story is perhaps as long and eventful as Maverick Blair's. He started as a pilot aboard the TCS Gettysburg sometime in or before the 2660s. When Commodore Kane aboard the Gettysburg ordered his pilots to open fire on Kilrathi civilian transports, he and the others refused to do so on the basis that it was an illegal order, which started the events of the Gettysburg Mutiny. After he was given a full pardon, Admiral Tolwyn was so taken by the man's strength of character that he brought him aboard the Concordia for a tour of duty. Afterwards, he would be promoted to colonel and wing commander of the newly minted TCS Tarawa. From there, he would take part in the end run along with Strike Force Valkyrie, where early into the operation he would be forced to assume command of the Tarawa after her original captain died. Under his leadership and through a most Herculean effort, he managed to complete the mission of assaulting Kilra and live long enough to return to Confed and tell the tale. Bear would retain command of the Tarawa throughout the next 18 months and until the end of the False Armistice, where he would be assigned command of the TCS Coventry, one of the escort destroyers of the Victory Battle Group. After the war, he was honorably discharged from the Confederation Navy and took up position as wing commander of the FRLS Independence, which in actuality was the first ship he ever commanded, the Tarawa. The Concordia was a proud name that would live long in Terran history. In large part due to her sacrifices and unceasing commitment, the Terran Confederation was able to hold back the Kilrathi Empire and prevent the subjugation of humanity. Even though her time is over, she will always be a standard bearer for the ships of the Confederation Navy.